Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 26th lecture of the Southeast Asia Lecture Hall. My name is Sukmawati Belapertiwi. I'm from the Department of International Relations, Bina Nusantara University, Jakarta. Ladies and gentlemen, to deliver this lecture, we have Kishore Mahbubani here today with us. Kishore Mahbubani is currently a distinguished fellow at the Asia Research Institute National Universities of Singapore. Prof. Mahbubani has excelled into distinguished careers in diplomacy from 1971 to 2004, and in academia from 2004 to 2019. In diplomacy, he was the Singapore Foreign Service for 33 years from 1971 to 2004. He had postings in Cambodia, Malaysia, Washington, D.C., and New York, where he twice was Singapore's ambassador to the UN and served as president of the UN Security Council in January 2001 and May 2002. As a result of his excellent performance in his diplomatic career, he was conferred the Public Administration Medal by the Singapore government in 1998. Without further ado, let us invite Kishore Mahbubani to deliver his lecture. Time is yours.
Okay. Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Ibu Bella, for that generous introduction. I'm very happy to join you all to talk about geopolitics. I wish that I didn't have to speak about geopolitics. See, geopolitics is a very cruel business. Very cruel business. You know, in most businesses, if you don't do well, you lose money, you go bankrupt, you carry on. Life carries on. In geopolitics, you do badly, the likelihood is that a war starts and many people die. And unfortunately, geopolitics seems to be ingrained into human nature because it has been around for 2,000 years plus. And there's some iron laws of geopolitics that have been around for 2,000 years that we thought that now that we are so clever, so well educated, we are liberated from the laws of geopolitics. Sadly, we are not, as I will document, you see. And the remarkable thing is that until recently, people thought, well, you know what, there will always be a few conflicts here and there, but by and large, the trend line will be downwards, right? The geopolitics will diminish and the world will become a safer and safer place. But instead, as you can tell, I mean, from your gut feeling, I'm sure you can tell that it's becoming a more dangerous world. And I hope I'll try to explain to you why it's a more dangerous world. And I also want to begin by saying that what is strange about the world of today is that mistakes about geopolitics are not just being made by, the poor developing countries. And everyone says, okay, they're poor, they're developing, so what can you expect? They make mistakes, right? But I can tell you that certainly one of the biggest wars that is happening in the world today is a result of a geopolitical failure, not by poor developing countries, but by some of the smartest and most sophisticated countries in the world. And here I'm referring to the European Union, So it's shocking that the European Union, which has, the people of the European Union enjoy a wonderful standard of living, high levels of education, supposedly competent leaders, and yet they are behaving, they're responsible for a major war that is happening in the world today, which is Ukraine war. Now, you must be surprised by that. Surely you all read in the papers that the Ukraine war is a result of Russia invading Ukraine. It's true. The Ukraine war is also a result of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine That's also true, because any time under international law, when a big power invades a small country, it is a violation of international law. But wars also happen because of geopolitical incompetence. And here, the geopolitical incompetence was generated by as I say, one of the most sophisticated organizations in the world, the European Union. And I'll explain how they did so. And by the way, I'm not having any PowerPoints, but if you want to get more information on the point, I'll point to you to some sources. And by the way, just for your information, one of my books, which discusses some of these issues, is a free book. You can access it for free. It's called The Asian 21st Century. When it was launched in 2022, the publisher, German publisher, expected 20,000 downloads of the book. Instead of 20,000 downloads of the book, there have been 4 million downloads in 160 countries. So I point that out to you because the world in some ways is preparing for the Asian century. And one reason why they're preparing for the Asian century is also because the West is making serious mistakes at this point in time. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, Exhibit A is Ukraine. So what was the basic mistake made by the European Union? Very simple mistake. When you live next to a great power, and Russia is a great power, you must understand that every great power has got security concerns, right? They want to protect themselves. And the way they protect themselves is by ensuring that no hostile force is planted near their borders. And by the way, if you want the best historical example of this, you just have to look at what happened during the time of President John F. Kennedy, when the then Soviet Union wanted to plant missiles in Cuba next to the United States of America. The United States of America said, no way, you cannot plant missiles close to my borders. If you do, I'll start a war. And incidentally, you should all study the Cuban episode of 1962, 1963, because that's when the world came closest to having a nuclear war, right? And, as you know, in a nuclear war, and a nuclear war can result, if you have bad geopolitics, you will see that as a result of a bad geopolitics, you can have a nuclear war happen to you also. And that, by the way, means the end of the world, the end of humanity. And this is why you have to pay attention to geopolitics. As I said, in business, you go bankrupt, you carry on. In geopolitics, you have wars, you lose lives. In the worst case scenario, nuclear war, everybody dies. That's why geopolitics is important. And I gave you an example of how that almost happened in 1960. Now, we used to think in those days that people were not so clever. This is 2025. We are much more clever. And guess what? We also brought the world to the brink of a nuclear war in the 2020s. And this happened because the European states didn't try to understand the security concerns of Russia and continued to expand NATO. And NATO is a hostile force to Russia. They continued to expand NATO eastwards towards Russia. And what was terrible about this is that the West kept on doing this, even though the West had promised Russia that it would not expand NATO, right? And what is amazing about the Ukraine war is that 25 or 26 years ago, in the year 1999, 26 years ago, a great American thinker called George Kennan. And George Kennan was the man who masterminded the Cold War strategy for United States. He was a brilliant strategic thinker. And he said 26 years ago, he says, why are we expanding NATO? Why are we pushing NATO closer to the Russia? He says, if you do that, you'll get the Russians very angry. And when the Russians get angry, they will react against you, right? They will launch a military invasion, and then you'll blame the Russians, right? And you know, the West is blaming the Russians, right? But 26 years ago, they were warned, right? Explicitly warned. You should not expand NATO. So, and by the way, if you want more facts on this, there are two professors, two American professors who have spoken a lot about the subject. One is Professor John Mearsheimer from the Chicago University. You can Google his lecture on the origins of the Ukraine war has been watched 40 million times. 40 million times. So it's a very persuasive lecture. And then you can also listen to another American professor, Professor Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia University. And these two professors give you all the information on how the Ukraine war could have been avoided if the West had been wiser, right? Now, what is shocking is that the most advanced societies have made this mistake. And what is really terrible about this mistake that has been made by the Europeans, I mean, I got to emphasize that the push to expand NATO came, of course, primarily from the United States, and the United States was trying to expand its sphere of influence, which is what great powers do. But the Europeans could have been wiser, and the Europeans could have told the Americans, this is not wise. You should not corner Russia. You should not put Russia in a position that it will lead to a war in Ukraine, right? The Europeans could have prevented it. So why didn't the Europeans do so? And I can tell you that one reason for this is that the Europeans have become incompetent. And don't take my word for it. You know, another great strategic thinker of the 20th century who just passed away recently was the great American strategic thinker, Henry Kissinger. I had the pleasure of getting to know him. I think Ibu Bella mentioned that I was in New York. So when I was serving as Singapore's ambassador to New York, I got to know Henry Kissinger. And I went to see him for my last one-on-one conversation in October 2022, about a year before he died. He died in October 2023 at the age of 100. And I remember in my conversation with him, I asked him about the Ukraine war. And he made it very clear that one reason why the Ukraine war happened was because the quality of mind of European leaders has been going down. They were not thinking long-term and strategically about the world. And they could have easily anticipated the Russian reaction, but they didn't anticipate it. And as a result of it, you had this cruel war happening in Ukraine, right? So that's why I want to emphasize to you, the first point I want to emphasize to you is that geopolitics is a very cruel game, and therefore you have to understand it well, because if you don't understand it well, your country can get caught in wars. And this is especially true for Asian countries, because I'm going to switch now. My first point was about Ukraine war and how it could have been avoided. My second point is that the biggest geopolitical contest that has broken out in human history is breaking out in our region. And why is that so? because the number one geopolitical contest in the world is always between the world's number one power, which today is the United States of America, and the world's number one emerging power, which today is China, right? And as you know, China has become stronger and stronger. I mean, it's amazing how fast China has grown. Incidentally, China's growth has been remarkable. I mean, let me just give you one statistic. In the year 2000, the United States economy was 8 times bigger than China's economy. 8 times bigger. Now the US economy is only 1.5 times bigger. Only 1.5 times. And clearly, the Americans feel threatened by the rise of China. And there's an iron law of geopolitics. I mentioned to you earlier that geopolitics has been around for 2,000 years, right? There's an iron law of geopolitics that when the world's number one emerging power, which today is China, is about to overtake the world's number one power, which today is United States, the world's number one power will push down the world's number one emerging power. And that's exactly what's happening in this contest between US and China. And incidentally, I did write a book called Has China Won, which gives you more details on how that happened and why that happened. Now, of course, if you listen to American commentators, they will always say, we are not against the Chinese people. We are only against the Chinese Communist Party. Because the Chinese Communist Party, is evil, it suppresses its people, and of course it is not democratic, and that's why we are opposed to it. Now, I can tell you, by the way, the other very important thing I must tell you about geopolitics is that the biggest lies are told in geopolitics. I'm not exaggerating. The biggest lies are always told in geopolitics. And I can tell you this, if tomorrow China became a vibrant liberal democracy, but continue growing, United States will still push it down, even if it's a democracy, because it is not about democracy, it's about who is number one and who is number two. And it's amazing, In theory, we human beings are smart, sophisticated people. We're not supposed to behave like animals in the jungle. But in geopolitics, it's about jungle animal instincts. It's about who's number one or who's number two. And therefore, you have this incredible impulse in the United States to push down China. And what's remarkable, incidentally, as you all know, United States today is a deeply divided country, very badly divided country. And as you know, the Democrats and Republicans don't agree on anything, nothing, except for one thing. It's time to push down China. And you can see, for example, right? You remember in 2018, when Donald Trump was president in his first term, he launched tariffs against China, right? That's how the geopolitical contest broke out. At first in a trade war. And United States was trying to slow down China's growth by imposing tariffs. And it's interesting, when Joe Biden was the presidential candidate in 2019, he criticized Donald Trump. He said, you know what? What President Trump has done is wrong. These tariffs will not hurt the Chinese. These tariffs will hurt the American people. And therefore, this tariff should be removed. Joe Biden said this as a presidential candidate. And then he became president. And what did he do? Did he remove the tariffs? No. Even though he had criticized the tariffs, he didn't remove the tariffs. Why? Because when he became president, he said, okay, it's also my job to make sure that China doesn't overtake us, right? And indeed, Joe Biden is a very honest man. He says, that China wants to grow its economy and become the number one economy in the world. And Joe Biden said, this is the exact words he used. He says, ain't gonna happen on my watch. I can tell you, no American president wants to be the president who led America to becoming the number two position. So every American president will want to keep the number one position and keep up the pressure on China. And that's why Trump started it, Biden continued it, Biden left, Trump came back, the geopolitical contest carries on. So it's nothing to do with personalities. Personalities are irrelevant. The president's name can be President X, but he will do what the geopolitical imperative says, which is to push down your competitor. But at the same time, I must say that you will also find that geopolitics is a very complex business. And I say, while the personalities don't matter in the sense that the contest will carry on, how the contest is carried out can change depending on the personality. So, for example, in theory, since President Trump, as you know, is a much stronger, more assertive president than Joe Biden. And Joe Biden is a very nice guy. I mean, and by the way, incidentally, I want to mention parenthetically that Joe Biden and President Xi Jinping actually became good friends. When they were vice presidents, they were good friends. Xi Jinping visited the United States as vice president. Joe Biden hosted him. Joe Biden visited China as vice president. Xi Jinping hosted him. They became good personal friends. But guess what? Despite their personal friendship, relations became worse between US and China. And the contest continued. Again, another example how personalities in that sense don't matter. But in any case, President Trump has been elected. Now, so one would expect that because President Trump is more assertive, things will get more difficult. But surprisingly, as you can see, President Trump is also by nature a deal maker. So this is surprising. In theory, relations should get worse between US and China because Biden is a nice guy. Trump, as you know, is not a nice guy. Biden is a softie. Trump is a very, very brash, very assertive, very strong. But yet, surprisingly, it is conceivable that relations between US and China might be more stable in Trump 2.0. And that's also, by the way, partly a result of the fact that China has also become much stronger in the intervening years. As I told you, the contest started in 2018. We're now in 2025. 7 years have passed. In the first round, China tried its best to be nice to the United States and to say, okay, let's try and compromise and settle. This time, as you know, China has been very tough and said, no, if you push me, if you put tariffs on me, I'll put tariffs on you. You block my exports, I'll block exports to you. I'll block exports of minerals. And you can see as a result of partly because of Trump wanting to be a deal maker, partly because of China's strong stance. Surprisingly, there might be a deal in the coming weeks between US and China. Surprisingly. And when in theory, there should not be such a deal. But I also want to add another important point here, that as the US and China, and the contest will get fiercer and fiercer, we in the rest of the world will be affected by it also. And especially we in ASEAN. I know many of you come from the ASEAN countries, and of all the regions in the world that will feel the effect of this contest most strongly, ASEAN will be one of the regions. And there'll be pressure on ASEAN countries to take sides in this contest, which is why one of the very important messages I want to convey to you all is that we 10 countries in ASEAN, if we want to protect ourselves from the pressures coming from US and China, we must stick together. Because if we are, as you know, there's a famous saying, united we are strong, divided we fall. That can happen to the ASEAN countries, the 10 ASEAN countries. We can disagree on some things, we may have disagreements on some issues, but when it comes to the US-China contest, we must all say the same thing, which is what we've been saying so far, that ASEAN wants to be friends with the United States, and ASEAN wants to be friends with China, and we don't want to take sides. Now, if we took this position individually as countries, we'd be subject to lots of pressure. But if we combine together as a group, then we are protected to some extent from this contest. And I must say, the good thing is that so far, the ASEAN countries have been quite good at working together to handle the US-China contest. And if you think, if you think, am I serious that actually US and China would apply pressure on ASEAN countries to take sides? Let me give you a concrete example, right? And I want to point to one country, which is not a small country. In fact, this country is one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. This country is the United Kingdom, right? Now, the United Kingdom is a very powerful country, right? Its economy is among the top 10 economies in the world. It has nuclear weapons. 100 years ago, the sun didn't set on the British Empire. The British could run the world effortlessly. They're a very powerful country. But you know what happened? And I'll tell you a true story. In January 2020, right, just before COVID, I was in Davos at the World Economic Forum meeting. And I was speaking to a group of CEOs from all over the world. But before the meeting, I was talking to my fellow panelists, who was a very senior British gentleman. And in 2020, UK was under pressure from the United States to stop using Huawei. As you know, Huawei is this Chinese telecommunications company, and which the United States has been trying to push down, because any company that becomes strong in China, the United States will try to push down. So I asked this British gentleman, a very senior gentleman, I said, what will the UK do? Will you be able to continue using Huawei? And the British gentleman said to me, Kishore, we, the British, we have planted our GCHQ people. Now, GCHQ stands for the Signals Intelligence People. As you know, all great powers spy through telecommunications and all that. So he said, we have planted our spies into Huawei. We have scrubbed the software of Huawei. We know what's going on in Huawei, so we will allow Huawei to continue in the UK. This British gentleman said to me. So I said, come on. The question is not technical. It is political. Can the British withstand pressure from the United States to get rid of Huawei, right? January 2020. And this British gentleman got a bit upset with me. He said, Kishore, the United States needs the UK as much as UK needs the US. If we decide to stand firm, the US cannot do anything. You know what? You can go back and check, Google and check. He said that to me in January 2020. In June 2020, UK crumbled. In 6 months, UK crumbled and was forced to expel Huawei. Now, if a country like United Kingdom, strong, powerful, permanent member of the UN Security Council, can crumble under pressure from United States, you can imagine how much harder it is for other countries in the world to withstand pressure from the great powers. And I can tell you that the pressure on ASEAN states will increase in this coming decade because the contest between US and China will accelerate. Now, I've already said that we, the ASEAN countries, must stick together, but I think we need to do more because there are countries all over the world that do not want to take sides in this US-China contest. Just last week, I was in Africa. In fact, I came back from Africa 24 hours ago. If I yawn during the lecture, it's because I still have jet lag from my flight from Nigeria. And a week before that, by the way, I was in Chicago. I can tell you that many countries around the world don't want to take sides. And so one thing that ASEAN can do is that ASEAN can spread the word to countries around the world and say, why don't we take a common position that we won't take sides in this contest? But equally importantly, and I will conclude with this point, it's an important point. It's important for us, the countries outside US and China, to remind the US and China that today the world has shrunk, right? As you all know that. The world has become a small and interdependent place. In fact, as I look at the screen, and as I can see that you all are coming from so many different countries, this screen is an example of how the world has shrunk. And you know, one consequence of the world shrinking is that our fates are now intertwined. Let me explain that clearly by using a simple boat analogy. And again, this is another book that I wrote called Great Convergence, in which I explain the boat analogy. Now, in the past, when 8 billion people lived in 193 separate countries, it was as though they were living in 193 separate boats, right? So each boat had a captain or crew to take care of it. Now, I can tell you that if humanity was still living in 193 separate boats, if one boat got COVID, the other boat would not get COVID because you're separated by distance, right? But as you know, as we saw recently with COVID, when one country got COVID, all 193 countries got COVID. So what does that mean? It means that 8 billion people no longer live in different boats. They all live in 193 separate cabins on the same boat. And that's why COVID spreads. We're on the same boat. Now, if you are on the same boat, does it matter whether you have a bigger cabin or smaller cabin if the boat begins to sink? If the boat begins to sink, surely everyone should get out of their cabins and take care of the boat as a whole. And this is the big argument that the younger generation people like you need to make to the older people, to remind them that in this small interdependent world, we have to take care of the common global challenges first. And you know, we have many common global challenges. So that's why in my last chapter of my book, Has China Won? I point out the common interests that United States and China have in many issues. For example, we need to fight pandemics like COVID. One country cannot fight it. We must all come together. We need to fight climate change. Climate change is going to damage lots of countries around the world. We need to fight global financial crisis. More will be coming, right? We need to fight global terrorist challenges. So there are all these challenges, common global challenges that we have to deal with. So that's why it's very important for the young people like you to remind the old people like me that, hey, we live in a world where there are many common global challenges. And because there are these many common global challenges, we should press the pause button on the geopolitical contest and focus instead on the common challenges. Now, believe me, if we had wise leaders around the world, this is exactly what they will be doing. But unfortunately, and this is the paradox here, that even though the West has been dominating the world for the last 200 years, today the West no longer has wise leaders, right? And that's why I began my lecture by talking about how Europe could have prevented the Ukraine war. But because they no longer have wise leaders, they could not prevent the Ukraine war. Similarly, the Europeans should be among those. The Europeans believe more than any other countries in the world that climate change is a real threat. So if climate change was a real threat, the Europeans should be trying to persuade both US and China to press the pause button on the US-China geopolitical contest and work together to fight climate change. But the European leaders don't have the courage to do so, sadly. And indeed, sadly, the European leaders have become sycophants of the United States of America. If you don't believe me, look at what the NATO Secretary General has done, Mark Rutte. Last week, he called President Trump a daddy. I mean, that's shocking. Shows a complete lack of dignity. But he seems to think that by being sycophantic, by being subservient, that's the answer. And actually, as you know, in human relationships, you can never have a proper friendship if one partner is a sycophant to the other partner. Friendships occur between equal partners where you can speak frankly to each other. And the Europeans can't do that. They have lost it. And that's also part of the problem that we face in the world today. So as a result of that, even though logically, as humanity becomes better educated, more rational, we should be seeing less and less geopolitical struggles in the world. Sadly, I can tell you that there'll be more and more geopolitical struggles in the world. Why? Because it goes back to geopolitics that has been around for 2,000 years. So I'm sorry that I have to give you this bad news, but I think it's important for you all to have a realistic understanding of geopolitics because, as I said to you all, geopolitics is a very cruel business. If we do it badly, we will have wars. And here I must say, and this is an important point for all of you who come from ASEAN to know, you should all be amazed that there has been no major war in the ASEAN region for 46 years. That's a miracle. it shows you how wise the ASEAN leaders have been. I mean, just look across nearby. Just a few months ago, there was a major flare-up within India and Pakistan, right? That could also happen here in Southeast Asia, but it hasn't happened. The fact that there has been no wars in Southeast Asia for 46 years is absolutely amazing. It shows you how wonderful ASEAN is. So what you need to do is preserve ASEAN, because if you don't preserve ASEAN, you will have within ASEAN wars like the ones you saw between India and Pakistan, wars like the one you saw between Israel and Iran, wars like the ones that you see in Gaza today. So if you want to prevent those situations, understand geopolitics and make sure that you respect geopolitics. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mahbubani. I think there are many tough, provoking arguments from your side. So I think now we're going to taking questions. To ask question, please use the raise hand feature on Zoom meetings. For those of you who are joining online, please ask your questions in the chat box and I will read them out. Okay, so we have several questions already. I will start to take 3 questions. And then please mention your name and where are you from. I will start with my leftmost side here, Hilmi from Indonesia. Please.
Good afternoon, sir, ma'am. My name is Hilmi Pratama. I'm from Indonesia. Sir, within your previous lecture, you've mentioned a lot about, within my interpretation, is about Asian unity. And considering with today's current circumstances with having multilateral organizations such as ASEAN and the Shanghai Cooperation Council, how would you feel in theoretically about an organization such as SEATO or the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization coming back or being revitalized to promote better security measures in the event of, let's say, another widespread conflict within the Asian hemisphere? Thank you, sir.
Okay, reviving the old security organization in Southeast Asia. I think it is, related to, okay, being or living next door to the great power. Okay, let me open the second question first, Professor, and then we're going to answer the 3 questions at the same time. Yeah. Okay. Can I perhaps, wait a minute here, Zazira? Yeah.
Yeah, that's me. Hello, Professor Mahbubani. My name is Jazira Tobaeva. I'm a researcher from Central Asia. First of all, thank you very much for your insightful work. And I have a question for you. You've often spoke about the shift of global powers from west to east. Do you believe the world has already reached a point of no return in terms of Western global dominance? Thank you.
Okay, is it clear enough, Professor?
I guess
Do you
your
want-
question was with the shift of global power from west to east,
Yeah.
can we improve global governance? Is that your
Do
question?
you believe, is it the end of Western global dominance or not, or we should believe in its future?
Sorry, I didn't get that. Sorry, say repeat that one more time.
Do you believe the world has already reached the point of no return in terms of Western global dominance?
Okay, point of no return. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So now one more questions. Let me invite from the Philippines, Leo Marisuelo. Am I right? Please. Okay, I think you're still muted. Okay, I think there is a problem with the audio. I don't know whether it is from your side.
Thank you. I'm here now. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Greetings from the Philippines. And hello, Professor Mahbubani. My question is, in the context of the conflict between China and the Philippines in the West Philippine Sea, in the incursions of on the Chinese side, no, and its aggressions and its taking piece by piece of our islands in the South China Sea. So how do you think, sir, would the Philippines best in approaching the Chinese side in this conflict? Thank you.
Okay, how to approach the Chinese side. Okay, we already have 3 questions, Professor. Perhaps I would let you answer these 3 questions first.
Okay, thank you. The first question is about SEATO, Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. From time to time, I refer to articles I've written. And I wrote an article in the Singapore Straits Times. The title was Asia Say No to NATO. Asia Say No to NATO. Now, you see, the difference between ASEAN and NATO or SEATO is that in ASEAN, we include everybody, even if you have different political systems, right? NATO, for example, doesn't include everybody, right? NATO excludes Russia, right? In fact, the Russians tried very hard to join NATO, right? Many Russian leaders say, why don't you include us? Why are you making us the enemy, right? But in our case, we include everybody. And that's why ASEAN creates inclusive organizations. So, when you have NATO, you create NATO because there's a threat, right? You declare that country X is a threat. Why? This is my point about the Europeans. The Europeans made Russia into an enemy. They need not have made Russia into an enemy. That was a mistake on their part. So in our case, ASEAN, as you know, is surrounded by many great powers: China, India, Japan, South Korea. What do? We include them in ASEAN arrangements. So remember, the rule is be inclusive and not exclusive. And that's the solution. So we should not go to organizations like SEATO, and we should use NATO as a negative example and not a positive example, because NATO is a failure. Now, the second question is about the shift of power from west to east. Certainly, the power will continue to shift from the west to the east. And there's one statistic I'll give you so you understand it very clearly. In 1980, which is not only 45 years ago, the European Union was 10 times the size of China. 10 times. Today, the European Union and China are about the same size. Now, by 2050, European Union will be half the size of China. Now, can you imagine that? The European Union was 10 times bigger than China in 1980. Now the same size. And by 2050, when you all are adults, this European Union will be half the size of China. That's a very good example of how power is shifting. And if you look among the top 5 economies in the world, you find that, again, the majority now are Asians. China, Japan, India are in the top 5 economies in the world. So already the power shift is happening. But unfortunately, when it comes to global governance, the West refuses to share power in global governance. So, for example, the West insists that to be the head of the IMF, you must be a European. To be the head of the World Bank, you must be an American. That's an anachronistic rule. We must get rid of. And so, even though power has shifted to Asia, the West refuses to share power in international organizations with Asia, which I think is a mistake. It's an example of, again, another example of lack of wisdom on the part of the Europeans. Now, the third question is the most difficult question about Philippines and China. But if I want to give a delicate answer, I would say that there are 4 countries in ASEAN that have challenges with China in what most people call the South China Sea, what Philippines call the West Philippine Sea. And it's interesting that there are no reports of skirmishes between China and Brunei, China and Malaysia, or China and Vietnam. It's only between China and the Philippines. And here I would say, when your neighbor is a great power, you must exercise a lot of strategic discipline. You must always have the same policy, and you mustn't change your policy when political parties change, right? You must maintain strategic discipline. Now, in the case of Philippines, as you know, you had a President, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, who was close to China. She was succeeded by President Aquino, who was close to the US. President Aquino was succeeded by President Duterte, who was close to China. And President Duterte is now succeeded by President Marcos, who's close to the United States. So I think for small countries, you must not change your policy every 5 years. It's very dangerous. In geopolitics, you must work out a consistent bipartisan policy and stick to it. And here, I would say the Philippines should study how the Vietnamese manage China. And the Vietnamese have a saying that to become a leader of Vietnam, you must be able to stand up to China, and you must be able to get along with China. So that's what ASEAN countries need to be able to do. We need to stand up with China, but you must also be able to get along with China. That's the advice I give to all the ASEAN countries. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to take the second round of questions. I would like to invite Alif Bagas from Indonesia, and then after that, Sasindi and Yusinina. Please, Alif.
Okay, hello, selamat sore, Mr. I'm Bagas, I'm from Indonesia, and I'm a high school student, to be honest. So I have the question for you. Today we have a very, like the dangerous phenomenon in the geopolitics between in the younger generations into the geopolitics interest. Because I have the data in my country, the interest in politics seems to be decreasing, and it's make the very of the lower interest into the generation in the politics. This is because like the geopolitics conflict now, like the Israel in the Palestine and the Ukraine, and now we have knowing about the Iran into the Israel and USA. It's make the very of the lower of in the literacy about the younger to interest about the geopolitics. So my question is, what's your opinion about that, and what's your solution about this phenomenon about the interest politics is very lower in the younger generation? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. The lack of interest in politics among younger generations. Okay, Sasindi from Malaysia.
Hello, I'm Sasindi, and my question for you, Professor, is that you've spoken about the rise of multipolarity, especially in terms of economic and geopolitical power. Would you agree that while economic multipolarity is emerging, ideological power still remains largely Western? If the dominant frameworks of legitimacy, let's say like democracy, human rights, and developmental models are still defined by the West, can we really call the world multipolar? Thank you.
Okay, very interesting question. Thank you, Sasindi. Yusi?
Hello, Prof. Kishore. I'm Yusi from Indonesia. As we know, the defense industry in Southeast Asia grown remarkable. Will you mind to explain how defense industry play a role in geopolitics, especially in Southeast Asia? Because not many people talk about it, I guess. Thank you so much.
Role of defense industry. Okay, so Professor, please time is yours for the 3 questions.
Well, the first one from Alif, I think, who's a high school student, asking me of the interest in politics. I think it's good for young people to take an interest in politics, but you must also be aware that there are no easy answers, right? You know, I can tell you, I have been studying geopolitics for 55 years, right? And I can tell you that there were 2 wars two major wars that Israel was involved in. I think 1967 and 1973, right? And since that day, people have been talking about a two-state solution. One state for Israel, one state for Palestine. Now, people have been talking about that for consistently, right? Over 50 years. And you know what? It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. And this is a perfect example of how geopolitics is very cruel, right? And so I would say if you want to be interested in politics, be interested in politics, but get ready for a level of complexity and difficulty. And you will find for most of the geopolitical problems, there are no easy solutions, right? And unfortunately, like on Israel and Palestine, even though in theory, the world is united, that you should have two states, one for Israel, one for Palestine, there's been no progress in 50 years. Why no progress? Because of geopolitics, right? The most dominant power backs one's country, Israel, and Palestine has got no backers, no supporters. And that's why there's no solution. And this brings me to the second question about multipolarity and Western ideological dominance. And you are absolutely right that the West is still in many ways ideologically dominant in ideas. In fact, a lot of the time we listen to Western media. But at the same time, it's also true that respect for the West is going down around the world. And if there's one word that has caused the respect for the West to go down dramatically in the last 18 months or so, it is the word called Gaza. Now, every day when we turn on the TV, we can see that the people of Gaza are suffering, right? Now, we all, of course, condemn the attacks by Hamas on Israel. We condemn them because they are terrorist acts. But at the same time, the innocent people living in Gaza also need to be protected. And what is interesting is that all the Western leaders, they are very quick to talk about human rights abuses in Xinjiang, China, right? Tony Blinken said that there's genocide in Xinjiang, but there's no genocide in Xinjiang. Millions of people are not dying. There's no genocide, right? But when it comes to the killings in Gaza, even though everyone says that there have been violations of international law, international humanitarian law in Gaza, no Western leader is stepping up for that. And so the West has lost its moral credibility on the world stage. It is no longer as dominant as it used to be in the past. And as long as every day that Gaza continues, the West will lose its moral standing. And then the third question was about the defense industry. And I can tell you, the one place where the defense industry is very powerful is in the United States of America. And indeed, one of the most famous presidents in United States was President Eisenhower. He was a very popular president. He had won World War II. He was a general, so he knew what he was talking about. He warned the American people to be careful of the military-industrial complex. Unfortunately, his warning was ignored. And the reason, for example, why NATO kept expanding eastwards towards Russia is because NATO expansion was also driven by the military-industrial complex who wanted to sell weapons to the European countries. So if the Europeans had been wise, they would have said, no, this is not the thing to do. We should not expand NATO. But the Europeans were not wise, and that's why you have this Ukraine war. And so therefore, military-industrial complexes, therefore, do matter in the world, and we have to watch them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Mahbubani. Now, for the third round, I would like to invite Chan Pahat from Cambodia and then Margareta from Indonesia.
Hi, Professor. I'm from Kingdom of Cambodia. I have a question. What should Asian country should be ready for upcoming political event, especially for the Cambodia?
Sorry, I didn't hear your question. What was the question?
Again, what should Asian country be ready for upcoming political event, especially for Cambodia?
Political event, can you be more specific? What do you refer to, perhaps?
Like in the future, what like the young generation of the Asians should be prepared to challenge or face for the next, even in the futures, or like we can say it.
Okay.
Upcoming. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, Margareta.
Thank you for the opportunity, ma'am. Question, as we know that the geopolitics affected a lot of the global economy. The most busiest and important trade in the world is the hummus trade that in the between Iran and Oman. So, in my opinion, as the part of Asia, we are get especially is in Indonesia, we are have to be include of the part of the BRICS. So will it be emphasize the effect of the global the worst case of the global challenge economy?
Okay. If I can confirm, do you want to ask the impact of the closure of Strait of Hormuz to Indonesia, or do you want to talk about do you want to ask the Indonesia's joining BRIC?
The effect of the Hormuz Strait, ma'am.
Okay. Is it clear enough, Professor?
Yes. Yeah.
So I think I have one more question that I've got online. So perhaps the committee can help me to show the questions.
I can't see the question.
Okay, let us wait. Okay.
Okay, yeah. Screen sharing, yeah.
Okay, so from Melanie Makpantai, what are the examples of instances when ASEAN leaders demonstrated how wise they were that conflicts in Southeast Asia region were avoided? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Please.
Thank you. Okay, let me answer the questions.
Yes.
Can you see me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. The first one, what can the young generation do to prepare for politics? I think one thing I emphasize is study history. So for example, what you're going to see in the 21st century, I don't know if any of you have seen my memoirs. It's called Living the Asian Century. In Living the Asian Century, I tell the story of my life and how when I grew up as a child, I used to believe that I, as an Asian, I was mentally, intellectually, culturally inferior to the white man. That's what I believe as a child. That whites were superior, we Asians were inferior, right? And yet today, you're seeing the Asian countries are doing much better. Why are we doing much better? Because from the year 1 to the year 1820, the two largest economies of the world were always those of China and India, right? So the past 200 years of Western domination of world history have been an aberration. But to understand the aberration, you must go back and study history. So that's why if you look at my book, Living the Asian Century, I describe how the Asian countries have become more self-confident as a result of studying their own history. So that's my answer to the first question. Second question on the Straits of Hormuz. Certainly the closure of the Straits of Hormuz will be very bad, not just for the countries in that region, not just for Iran, Saudi Arabia, or Gulf and all that. It will be bad for the whole world. In fact, China will be badly affected because China imports a lot of oil from Iran and Saudi Arabia via the Straits of Hormuz too. So therefore, it's not in our interest to see the closure of the Straits of Hormuz, and therefore it's in our interest to see this conflict end soon. And here I must say, you have to give Donald Trump some credit, because at the end of the day, he managed to stop this conflict between Israel and Iran. If Joe Biden was still president, he would have been too weak. He would not have been strong enough. But Trump is showing that he's stronger. And therefore, in that sense, he's been good for the world economy, what he's done on the Straits of Hormuz. And then the third question, what have the ASEAN leaders done to prevent wars? You know, I can tell you, by the way, you may find this hard to believe, that during the Cold War, especially after 1975, as you know, when the communists took over Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, there was a lot of tension between Vietnam and ASEAN. And as you know, in the 1980s, there was a war that was going on between Vietnam and Cambodia, in Cambodia. Now, those wars carried on for a long time, right? Now, when wars carry on for a long time, as you see in the Middle East, it's very difficult to switch off wars. Very difficult. But you know what? ASEAN successfully did it. How did we do it? We were inclusive. We did the opposite of NATO. We didn't exclude Vietnam. We included Vietnam. We welcomed Vietnam to join ASEAN. We welcomed Cambodia to join ASEAN. We welcomed Laos to join ASEAN. We also welcomed Myanmar to join ASEAN. Now, can you imagine the European Union, in theory, is a much more sophisticated club. I was asked a question about Western ideological power. But you know, the European Union still cannot admit a single non-Christian country. Turkey has been applying to join the European Union for 30, 40 years. But because it is not Christian, the European Union will not allow Turkey to join, right? That shows a lack of confidence on the part of the European Union. It cannot handle diversity. By contrast, we in Southeast Asia, ASEAN is by far the most diverse region of planet Earth. Among the 700 million people in ASEAN, you have 250 million Muslims, 150 million Christians, 150 million Buddhists, Mahayana Buddhists, Hinayana Buddhists, we have Taoists, we have Confucianists, we have Hindus, we have communists. And you know what? We have no wars. That's remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable that ASEAN is at peace. And every morning when you wake up from your bed, the first thing you should say is, thank God we have ASEAN, because without ASEAN, you would see wars in Southeast Asia. Especially since I told you at the very beginning that geopolitics is a very cruel business. And the reason why we have no wars is because of ASEAN. So please, whatever you do, never rubbish ASEAN, never speak badly of ASEAN. You must wake up every morning worshipping ASEAN. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so perhaps, Professor, I would like to take up two more questions before we end the session. I would like to invite Janatul Firdaus from Brunei, and then for Ho Pham from Vietnam, please.
So hi, Professor. I'm Janatul Firdaus from Bangladesh, and I'm currently studying in Sweden. So now I see a huge difference between Asia and Europe, like how they think. And I also attended few more lectures on geopolitics. So my main concern is that in this Western part, people are more concerned about the sustainability and environment, just how you said in your lecture. And in our countries, if I talk about Bangladesh, India, or Pakistan, or other global south, where they're struggling with hunger, they're struggling to even ensure 3 times a meal for the people who are really poor. So it's completely different. Two regions are completely different. And you also talked about the arrogance of Western leaders. And what do you think? I mean, how can we ensure that they understand our problem and also listen to global south when they are implying any taxes, tariffs, or even if they are changing any rules or regulations? Because they think about themselves only, but no one is caring about the people who are really poor. Even if in Asian countries, the leaders who are like, they mostly think about themselves, how they can benefit themselves. But what about the general citizen living in those countries and affected by these global geopolitical situations? How about them?
Okay, thank you, Janato, and I apologize to mistakenly mention your country. Okay, so next, last one from Ho Pham from Vietnam.
Hello, Professor. Yeah, my concern is that with the Asian country facing many challenges inside and the strong pressure from the both from the trade war of US and China. Do you think it can stay natural in the future? And also, after the recent border problem between Cambodia and Thailand, should the Asians try to develop a new way, like sending small obsessed group to have stop conflict, but still respect its rule or not interference in each country? Thank you.
Okay, is it clear enough, Professor?
Yes, the first question was about the US-China trade war and the impact on ASEAN. And the second question was about Cambodia and Thailand.
Yeah. Thank you.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So let me answer the first question about the student from Bangladesh who's now in Sweden, I believe. Yeah. One thing I must tell you all, that the West likes to portray itself as a benign and benevolent civilization, right? Western media controls the world, and the West always says we are the kindest and the most generous people in the world. By the way, that's absolute bullshit. Don't believe it. Okay? Because I can tell you that one thing that is happening in the Western world is that the West is becoming less and less generous. Look at the United Kingdom, right? In an effort to help fight the war in Ukraine, what have they done? They have cut aid to Africa. So they are letting people in Africa to starve so that they can fight a war in Ukraine, right? So indeed, if you mentioned that the West likes to talk about sustainability, it's not true. They talk of sustainability, but their deeds don't match sustainability. If they really want to ensure that we have sustainability, you should press the pause button on the US-China contest, as I explained earlier, and you should stop the war in Ukraine. So, paradoxically, even though President Trump wants to stop the war in Ukraine, the Europeans want to keep on fighting. If a war continues, you cannot fight for sustainability. The biggest damage to environment is always done by wars, right? So if the Europeans were really smart, they would stop the war in Ukraine and find ways and means of compromising. And they should talk to Russia. Here in Asia, everybody talks to each other. And why aren't the Europeans talking to Russia? That's the first rule of diplomacy. You must talk to your enemy, right? And that's something that has not been done by the Europeans. So when you mentioned also in our case about hunger, which is true, that's our priority. But fortunately, the largest poverty reduction programs in world history have been carried out in Asia. So as you know, China has rescued 800 million people from poverty. India has rescued a few hundred million from poverty. ASEAN has rescued a few hundred million from poverty. So in Asia, we are doing a good job of reducing poverty. And the best answer to cutting poverty down is not through aid, but through trade. And that's how Asian countries have done it. So we should promote more trade among the ASEAN countries. The second questioner from Vietnam, Ho Fan, had two questions. One about the trade war between US and China. And I say that we in ASEAN, we can be damaged by this trade war. And you can see, for example, that even though Vietnam is a friend of the United States of America, Vietnam is going to receive a lot of high tariffs imposed by the United States because the United States claims that Vietnam is exporting Chinese goods to the United States. Now, by the way, there are WTO rules on this. There's something called rules of origin. And Vietnam can actually demonstrate that many of these products were actually manufactured in Vietnam and not manufactured in China. But unfortunately, the WTO rules are now being ignored by some Western countries. And that's bad for us. So we should go back to the WTO and strengthen the World Trade Organization. That should be our answer. Now, on Cambodia and Thailand, it's very sad to see this contest, this geopolitical conflict between Cambodia and Thailand. But the only piece of good news is that you look at the differences between India and Pakistan. Immediately, you had rockets being fired, planes coming down, people dying, and so on and so forth. But, in the case of Cambodia and Thailand, there have been some minor skirmishes, but no major war. And here, I hope that the chairman of ASEAN, normally is the job of the chairman of ASEAN to mediate in such conflicts. Unfortunately, now Malaysia is the chairman of ASEAN. And I suspect that Malaysia may be quietly behind the scenes trying to do something to moderate the conflict between Thailand and Cambodia. So this is why I think, as I said, you should worship ASEAN, because of ASEAN, this conflict within Thailand and Cambodia is kept at a very low level and has not become a major bloody war as you see in other parts of the world. So thank you very much for sharing your time with me. I hope I've responded to your questions.
Okay, so Professor, can I have one more questions?
Sure.
Okay, so the committee, I think, will share the questions that have been collected online. So this is the question from Edwin Sri. What is your opinion or assessment, Ambassador Mahbubani, that most Asia still experiencing colonialism of the mind? Please.
Well, I think I would say the colonialism of the mind carries on. And I find that, I've written 10 books. And I find that Asians like to read books written by white men on the same subject rather than by Asians. And that's a perfect example of colonialism of the mind. They believe that in one way or another, the white man is still smarter than the Asians. But it will take some time. As I explained, when I was a child, I did believe that the white people were superior to us Asians. And it's a fact. My parents believed it, I believed it. But times have changed. So what I think is important for Asians to do is to develop greater cultural self-confidence in ourselves. And we've got to understand that the future answers on, for example, how Asian countries should get along with each other, we have to go back to our own history. And we don't have to follow European norms, because European norms are black and white. You're either with me or against me. That's how Europeans behave. That's not how we should behave. In Asia, we compromise. And I like the Indonesian concept of musyawara and mufakat, which means consultation and consensus. So don't fight each other. Talk to each other and compromise. So that's what we in Asia should be doing, therefore. So I would say, I hope that if you get a chance, have a look at my books, because what I try to suggest in my books is that we need to develop an Asian way of thinking in dealing with these challenges that are coming.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Mahbubani. I think time is up. I don't want to conclude because I think your lecture give us more questions, provoke more questions rather than answer. And so perhaps I would like to just take some notes. The first one, I think you start to emphasize the importance of geopolitics, and that it is a very cruel business, dangerous business. You start with the explanation that perhaps many others would further discuss about Russia and Ukraine war as a result of EU's geopolitical incompetence, and then you going on by arguing that in this world personality is irrelevant and it's driven more by geopolitical imperatives anyway. And then you also give us example the difficulty of a major powers such as United Kingdom against the US pressure, and it leaves up questions on how about ASEAN's much smaller countries dealing with the great power rivalry. But then you give us a more optimistic tone that the way we escape, one of the way we could escape this geopolitical tensions is by shifting the attentions to common problems to deal with global challenges. And in this case, ASEAN played important role. And I totally agree with you, because for the major powers, we talk a lot about the importance of economic power, military power, but I think we should also take into account the importance of adaptability skill. ASEAN, even though we are smaller countries, but I think we have proven our adaptability to great power rivalry and changes in the region and now in the Indo-Pacific. I think that's it from me. Again, thank you very much for your insights, and I would like to invite other participants to open your camera so that the committee can take the pictures, screenshot the pictures with all of you with Prof. Mahbubani.
Thank you. That was a brilliant summary.
Thank you very
Well
much.
done.
Yeah.
I can see you're very sharp.
Yeah. See you all, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.